I don't know about the rest of you, but I cannot get enough of Masters of the Air. Imagine if you found out that your father was in World War II, which you knew, but was writing these incredible letters back home and so many details of what was never revealed you find after your mother passes on and he's long gone. It's just an incredible book. I'm serious. I think anybody out there who loves history, who loves love stories, this is for you. The name of the book is called Letters from World War II, the story of life and love during the extraordinary events of World War II. Barbara Jane Hannon joins us, and we're talking about her parents here on Author's Corner in this book on America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney. So, Barbara, thanks for coming on and sharing.
Thank you.
Tell us about what I started to tell there. How did you find out about the role, the life, the things that happened with your dad and these mysterious letters?
Well, I think my sisters and I grew up with parents who were in World War II. But like a lot of veterans, once that war was over, they never talked about it. And my parents never talked about it. We heard little stories and snippets, but I never got the sense that anything bad happened. They just didn't talk about it. And when my mother died, my sisters and I had to clean out her house, like, of course, you have to do. We thought we knew every single thing that was in that house, but of course we didn't. In the back of her closet, we found 2 boxes. One box contained about, I think, 85 letters between 1941 and 1945 that they exchanged. And then the other box was just stuffed full of all these really incredible documents. They're very historical. There were telegrams to my mother from the War Department. The very first one that I saw said, "The Secretary of War regrets to inform you that your husband, Lieutenant George Hannon, has been missing over Germany since January 11th. And I looked at the date of that telegram, and it was January 26th. And I thought, what? My mother had no idea he was even missing. When I found the second telegram, it was February 18th. And all it said was, the Secretary of War would like to inform you that your husband has been reported as a prisoner of the War of Germany by the International Red Cross. That's all it said. And I suddenly realized, I looked at this timeline, although I knew that my dad parachuted out of a plane in World War II during an air battle. I didn't know when, the date. I knew he was in a German prison camp. I don't know if I thought he was just there for a couple of months, weeks. When I looked at these dates and realized my dad was in there for 16 months, I was stunned. I didn't know his story. Some of the other documents were unbelievable besides the telegrams. Every single flight he went on from Ridgewell Air Base, he saved his flight record. Wow. It said how many hours he was in the plane, and it said his target, who they were bombing.
Wow.
And the very last one had a big stamp across it, and it was January 11th, 1944, target Focke-Wulf Factories, Asserschleben, Germany, and a big stamp across it, missing in action. And I was just sort of stunned. I kind of hunted through the rest of the box, and here were his prisoner of war documents, all in German that I had to have translated. There were medical records. There was a commendation from Winston Churchill, signed by Winston Churchill. I picked that up and went, whoa, and
Yes.
then in the bottom of the box, the most stunning thing really is there were some German Reichsmarks, and they were dated 1939, 1941. They were German, and I got that. He was in a German prison camp. But then I pick up this red, white, and blue French franc. It was a 10 French franc note. And I looked at that. It's a French franc. And
Wow.
I remember yelling at my sister in the other room saying, hey, did you know Daddy was in France? What? He was in France. He had to have been in France. There's French francs here. And she came in to the floor. I was sitting on the floor going through these boxes, and she said, France? He wasn't in France. All we knew is he was shot down, spent some time in a German prison camp, and then after the war got on a boat, sailed home to the United States, got on a train, and my mother met him. That is all we knew. And yet I am looking at a very different story here. And I happened to be a nurse, and I was extremely interested, Kate, in his medical records. There was a medical record when he went to navigation school in 1943, and it listed his weight, and it was like 162 pounds.
Wow.
Then I pick up a medical record from Camp Lucky Strike, St. Valery, France, and it listed his weight at 124 pounds. And I thought, wait a minute. He lost almost 40 pounds? What? Did he not have food? Well, I needed to find out, and I needed to put together the timeline because I knew my parents were married June 19th, 1943. In Matherfield in Sacramento, and the story my mother always told was he asked her to marry him, and she got on a train in Iowa all by herself to go out to Sacramento to get married. My grandparents could not go because in World War II you couldn't get train tickets. Trains, cross-country trains, were for troops. But my dad's father, my grandfather, was a conductor on the Rocket, the Chicago Rock Island Pacific, and got her a ticket. So she went out there. They got married he graduated at 10 in the morning, and they stood in line at the Post Chapel. And my mother said it was like an assembly line. Boom, 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 every 10 minutes. All these guys got married. And then in this box, there was a bill for the Mark Hopkins Hotel in San Francisco under Lieutenant George Hannon and Mrs. Hannon for 5 days. So they had a honeymoon in San Francisco, but my dad was in England by August. So they had a week's honeymoon. My mother had to go back to Iowa. My dad had to do 100 hours of flight training with a crew. They put the B-17 crews together, and they had to learn to fly together. And then he flew over to England, and she didn't see him for 2 years.
Wow.
And for me, not knowing the story, I was stunned. And all I could do was think of my mother, married for a week, and her husband flies off to England, and she doesn't see him for 2 years. I thought of her when she got these telegrams, and the most difficult thing for me was I had to put this story together. All I would have had to do, Kate, was ask my dad, ask my mom, but it just never came up. They just never talked about it. I never thought, by the time you get into your teenage years, you're not interested in your parents' life.
No.
But I am now. And I had to put the story together. What happened? Why was he shot down? What was this prison camp like? How did he get out of this prison camp and end up in France? He was in a prison camp clear up in the Baltic, Stalag Luft 1, on the Baltic. way up on the Baltic Sea. There were no Allied armies anywhere near him. This was Russian territory that became East Germany. How did he get out of there? What was life like for him in this prison camp? What happened? Why did he lose? I was obsessed. And the first thing I did was get on a plane and fly over to Ridgewell Air Base in England. And they have at this Air Force base a little museum and a wonderful curator who is very interested and talked to me all about what life was like for these crews that were flying in late 1943 and early 1944. And his very words to me were, it was a slaughterhouse. Until the 8th Air Force got control of the skies over Germany, clear into the middle of 1944, these guys that were flying early, it was a slaughterhouse. They didn't have fighter cover. They really weren't as good in combat. And they had a 1 in 4 chance of making it to 25 missions. 1 in 4, 25%. And he said to me, you know, more airmen were lost in World War II than the entire Marine Corps. Did you know that? And I said, no. And he took me all over the airbase. The runways are still there. And we walked out onto the runways. And I can't even tell you what it was like for me to stand on that runway at Ridgewell. And this guy said, there's been no building around here. These fields are exactly what your father saw every time he got in that plane and took off.
When we come back, a trip to Germany and more on the extraordinary letters that Barbara Jane Hannon's parents shared. That's coming up round the bend as we continue our conversation with Barbara Jane Hannon, Letters from World War II, a story of life and love during the extraordinary events of World War II. Continue our conversation with Barbara Jane Hannon, the book Letters from World War II, a story of life and love during the extraordinary events of World War II. So, Barbara, you decided you just had to go and see for yourself, right?
I went all the way to Germany, took an 8-hour train ride clear up on the Baltic coast, and the area where Solid Lift 1 was has been made a memorial. Nothing's built there. It's just a field. But there's a museum there, and the man who runs the museum is a German. His name is Dieter. In fact, he emailed me this morning because the 80th anniversary of the rescue of these guys is going to take place May of 2025. And we're trying to get information out there that there's going to be a memorial celebration in Bart, which I'm going to talk about my book. He has a copy of my book. And he flat out told me what life was like for these guys. There are a number of other sources that you can read about Stalag Luft 1. These guys were systematically starved by the Germans. They were not given any food. The only food they got were Red Cross boxes, and when those didn't get delivered, these guys didn't eat. There were at times some very brutal commandants who would blow an air raid siren, and these guys had to get out of sight, or the guards in the guard towers would open fire. I had my dad's prison camp record translated by a friend who could read and speak German. And on the back, she turned it over and said, Barb, look at this. These are punishments. This list with these dates are the times your dad was punished.
Wow.
And I was like, for what? And she said, well, this first German word means sort of insubordination. So whether he didn't salute a German guard, I don't know. The other two were digging tunnels. Yay for my dad, digging tunnels. But I put the story together, the timeline, and then I hadn't even started reading the letters yet, Kate. I had some difficulty, my sisters and I, reading the letters. First of all, you don't expect to read love letters from your parents, I think. And These were from the heart love letters. George, I miss you so much. I think about you every day. You wait there, George, and I'll wait here. And one day we will never have to wait anymore. I mean, these letters are spectacular. My mother and father did nothing in their letters but be supportive, hopeful, courageous. I know we'll see each other again. I think it'll be soon, my darling. All these letters just were stunning. In all of those 85 letters, there was not one single word about poor me, why did this happen to me, this terrible, nothing. They're just these positive letters. My mother made such an effort. People don't write letters like this. She made such an effort to tell my dad what she was doing, everyday things, and that's what he wanted to hear.
Wow.
in that. But some of the letters are blacked out because they were heavily censored by the Germans. Every letter was read, some of it blacked out. Even holding them up to the light, you could not see through this black ink that they blacked stuff out. The other thing is that his first letters from England to my mother, he is so excited. It's unbelievable. He is writing to her after his first leave in London. I saw Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey, and we stood in Piccadilly Square. Wait, Dorothy, until I can bring you back here and you can see they're very exciting letters. He's clearly excited. He is keeping track of all the countries he's flown over and writing to my mom. Today we saw Denmark and the tip of Norway. But then about November 1st, his letters changed dramatically. And you can read through these letters just how scared he is. And he wrote her, "It gets harder and harder some days to get into the plane because you don't know what's going to happen, and your life hangs suspended until you see the coast of England again. But I signed up for this job, and I will do it to the best of my ability, no matter the outcome." I'm like,
I love that.
My dad, no complaint. And then, he's talking in his letters how hard it is to get to 25, counting one at a time. And when he got to 15 missions, he wrote her, "I can count the number of missions I have left on two hands. Maybe I'll be home by Easter." But of course, it didn't happen. He was shot down in January and on his 16th mission. So the letters were difficult. And my parents wrote each other on Christmas Eve every year for 4 years. I have 4 years of Christmas Eve letters. They say the same thing. "Darling, in my heart, I know this is our last Christmas apart and we'll be together forever, as many Christmases as we're allowed." And I am just like,
wow.
Okay. So I put this story together. The most dramatic piece of this story, which you would have to read the book to find out, is how these 9,000 POWs were rescued out of this prison camp up on the Baltic with no allies around. It is a stunning story. It was the most unbelievable experience of the whole war for them to fly in, drop down, and pick these guys up and fly them to the France, to the ramp camp.
Wow.
And the ramp camps, they, thank goodness, stopped calling people like my dad POWs. And they started calling them ramps, recovered American military personnel. And there were 5 ramp camps on the coast of France. And they were all named, they were called the cigarette camps. They were Camp Terryton, Camp L&M, Camp Lucky Strike, Camp Philip Morris.
Wow.
And they were named for American cigarettes. And they flew these guys to camps.
Wow.
And I have all the documents from Camp Lucky Strike, and the most interesting of all of them that my dad saved were the food instructions on what to eat, because these guys were sick. They were malnourished.
No.
The minute they came into Camp Lucky Strike, the first thing they saw was a Java Junction, and these were run by the Red Cross, fried donuts, coffee, candy, And these guys got off these trucks and they just tore into these Java junctions to drink coffee and to eat donuts. And this one guy wrote in his diary, I ate 20 donuts. Today, I'm in line at sick call because I have the GIs. The GIs was their term for diarrhea.
Yeah.
So Dad saved all of his eating instructions. And it's really interesting. Day 1 to 3, only eat cheese sandwiches, cream soups, and cocoa. If you tolerate that, then in 3 days we'll move. I mean, it was just really interesting.
It's incredible. Yeah. Your book is incredible.
The Red Cross nurses to stop giving these guys more than one donut. The surgeon
Wow.
actually went to these Red Cross nurses and said, one donut, one.
Wow.
One. They can't tell. And in one of my dad's letters from Lucky Strike, as soon as he got out of the food, he wrote my mother that he was gaining weight. And when he got home, he would look like, a chubby little cherub. And he thought he had gained 20 pounds already. And part of that was because they had hot dog trucks in the middle of the camp. And you could go up and get an American hot dog slathered with mustard. My mom would tell us that when he got off of the train in Minneapolis, of course, they all looked alike because they burned their clothes and gave them all new uniforms. So they all had these green fatigue pants on, green jackets, a green beret, and a duffel bag. And she did not recognize him. She said he was so thin. So anyway, I put this book together, and I am very proud of my parents. I wish I could have told them how brave my dad was, how supportive my mother was, but I didn't get a chance. So I wrote the book as kind of, I don't know, atonement for not ever asking them or being able to tell my dad how brave he was.
The good news is, and this is a perfect place to end this, is for everybody listening. It is so gripping. It is so amazing. I feel like I know Barbara's parents. The name of the book, Letters from World War II, A Story of Life and Love During the Extraordinary Events of World War II. Again, Barbara Jane Hannon's book. You can pick it up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for listening to this interview and this hour of the show. Make it count, everybody.